join us in that room next Sunday, noon, conference room. Okay, we're studying the book of James, and in the book of James, we're talking about relationships and communication. And I appreciate all of you that have dialogued with me about this class, and that just tells me that there's a lot of interest in your own lives in improving communication and relations, and you feel the same things that I do about this. I appreciate your suggestions and your insights, and keep doing that. In James 3, most people say that's the chapter on the tongue, which it is, but it's really a part of a discussion about putting our religion into practice in the way that we interact with each other. And the tongue is certainly part of it, but what comes off of our tongue originates in the mind or in the heart, right? And so Jesus said in Matthew 12, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And James repeats a lot of that so the heart, the mouth speaks. And James repeats a lot of that in James chapter 3. He talks about two kinds of wisdom. In the book of James, he told us if we lack wisdom, ask God. You ask God for wisdom, you go to his word. He says don't ask hypocritically, meaning if you really want God's wisdom, don't try to go to the Bible to defend your cause, but go to the Bible to really find out what it says, and then when you read it, accept it. Don't argue with it. And so throughout the book of James, he encapsulates basically the wisdom of God for relationships in the saying of the Old Testament, you shall love your neighbors yourself. Or Jesus put it a different way, do ye unto others as you would have them do unto you, which we call the golden rule, right? So if you just do that, almost everything else God says about relationships and communication is encapsulated in those statements, all right? But then James, in talking about the tongue and its power and how it has great destructive power and great constructive power in the lives of people, he says there's wisdom behind the way people use their tongue. Let's put this a different way. We all have a mode of operating when we talk to other people. It's something in our mind, or it's a way that we operate when engaging other people in conversation. What is behind that? What thought is behind that? That's the wisdom he's talking about. There's worldly wisdom, he says, in James 3. He says it's based out of selfish ambition and jealousy. So anytime your thought process is selfish when you're talking with someone, it's not going to be as positive a thought process. If it is motivated out of jealousy or envy, it's not going to be that positive. James says it's earthly or unspiritual. It's not coming from God. It's more carnal. It arises from the fleshly desires, see? And he actually says in James 3 that kind of thinking is demonic. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that suggests quite clearly that the demons, Satan's minions, are working on our minds all the time, and they're trying to get us to think in demonic ways. Now, when we say demonic, you might think of, some kind of horrible torture or murder or something, but no, we're just talking about in selfish ways that are based in our own desires and our own feelings and etc., as opposed to spiritual ways. So he says if you operate that way, the fruit of that is disorder and every vile deed. He says that in James chapter 3. On the other hand, he says the wisdom that comes from above is pure. It's peaceable. It's trying to make peace. It's gentle with other people. Now, does gentleness come naturally to most of us? Well, it doesn't to me. Some of you may be blessed with that disposition, but it doesn't to me unless I think about it, and I want to be that way. Open to reason. See, here's two people having a discussion. Person A wants to prove their point, and they're going to do it no matter what. And person B wants to prove their point, and they're going to do it no matter what. But with that attitude, neither is open to reason. And we can't really be open to reason unless we're willing to do what? Listen. Listen. See? Do we really want to know where the other person is coming from? Or are we so interested in proving our point that we don't care? See? And so selfish, based in pride. The wisdom which comes from above is impartial. We're willing to listen to anybody, regardless of their background, etc. It's sincere, meaning that we're open, we want resolution, we want to be fair, we want to be impartial, we want to listen. We want win-win, not win-lose. That's the idea of being sincere. And James says that a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So, two types of wisdom. We're summarizing the end of James 3. Two types of wisdom produce two types of results. See? Now, here's a question for each one of us. What kind of results do you want from your conversations in your family, with your friends, with your coworkers, with people? What kind of results do you want from those conversations? Do you want to build those relationships? Do you want to have better relationships? Or are you so intent on proving your own case that you don't care about those relationships? See, what is the wisdom behind what we're trying to do? So this brings us up to where we are. And so let's make some practical applications here for what we've been studying in James chapter 3. There's several kinds of everyday conflict that all of us are faced with at this time and at all times. James was actually talking about a church conflict that involved members of the church that were on different sides of a social conflict. It was really a conflict between the owners and the laborers, the rich and the poor. And some of those of both categories were in church, and so their conflict was bleeding over into the church. But let's talk about these other conflicts that can bleed over into the church. How about family conflicts? See, some family conflicts can be ugly, and there can be extended families who are all in the church, and those family issues can become church issues, right? And so in those family conflicts, whether they're within a household or a larger family, what's our goal? What's the wisdom behind it? Do we want to continue the relationships and improve the relationships, or do we want to prove our point? What do we want to do? So James said in James 1:19, which we keep going back to, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get mad, get angry. For the anger of man does not accomplish the righteousness of God. Now that's pretty simple, isn't it? The anger of man does not accomplish the righteousness of God. Now, in a minute, we're going to get to, okay, so how do I go about controlling that? Or how do I go about getting a handle on that, if that's what I need to do? So in any kind of, if we're talking family conflict, we need to be able to talk and we need to be able to listen. See, that's the hard part, isn't it? Where's the other person coming from? What's the other person or person's feeling? Listen. How can we resolve this in a way that's going to be good for all? We need to make sure that it's a safe place to talk and listen. If I come into a place knowing that you're going to blow my hair back and yell at me in everything I say, I don't feel safe to talk to you, right? If one of our children comes to us and they want to talk, and the response they're going to get is we're going to yell in their face if they bring up something that we disagree with, then they don't want to do what anymore? They don't want to talk with us anymore because they don't like that kind of an experience. I'm talking about adult children, but even younger children. So there needs to be a safe place to listen and speak with each other. We need to make it safe for each other. If we can't be safe, we're not going to have a productive conversation. So all this goes back to the wisdom of James. We've got today political conflict. Everybody gets so hyped up over elections and election years and everything, and we live in a place where that's really an intense thing. Look, the best wisdom that I know of for today is don't engage in those conversations. That's the best wisdom. Just listen, let somebody else talk, and say, what I've said before is, it's Christ that brings us together. And whether you're one of those red ones up there or one of those blue ones up there, I don't know why I put red and blue up there, do y'all? But if you're one of those red ones or one of those blue ones, it doesn't make any difference. If you're a Christian, James says, if anyone thinks he's religious, I think this is James 1:26, if anyone thinks he's religious and does not bridle his what? Tongue, that man's religion is vain. I think that applies to any conversation, don't you? So we need to bridle our tongue. What good does it do to argue a political case and lose relationships when we're really supposed to be representing Christ and behaving like Christ would want us to behave? Same thing goes in the workplace. There's all kinds of conflicts in relationships that arise in the workplace. Listening, being kind, being open, having a safe place to dialogue, that helps everything in the work environment. And when you don't have that, then you have a more difficult work environment. So this stuff that we're talking about is not just theoretical stuff. We use it every day we get up in the morning and we're with a husband or a wife. We use it every day when we're interacting with people at work. We use it every day in the community and conversations. We use it with our children. We use it all the time. Okay. So, I just want you to realize that this is right where we live. All right, so he says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Well, you might say, well, here's what caused it. He did this or she did that. Okay, well, maybe there was an event. But then there's people's reactions to those events. So he says, is it not this, your passions that are at war within you? So we have emotions inside of us, our passions. Those are carnal. We've got sexual desire, we've got pride, we've got anger, we've got shame, we've got embarrassment, we've got, y'all could help me list a whole bunch of other emotions. We've got ambition that may well be selfish ambition. We've got all these different things that are inside us, our passions. And those passions give rise to selfishness and conflict. So let's think about that for just a minute. He says it's your passions. You desire and do not have, and so you murder. So if we want to win something or win an argument, are we willing to commit murder to do it? Most of us in here hopefully would say, of course not. But are we willing to deeply hurt people through words? Are we willing to sever relationships? Are we willing to destroy families to win whatever point we're trying to win? He says in this case, you covet and cannot obtain. You fight and quarrel. You do not have because, notice these because clauses. You do not have because you do not ask. Now, last week, I threw this out there right before the end. Contextually, by looking at the way the argument is progressing in James, I'm not sure that he's really talking about asking God here. I think he may be talking about you do not have because you do not ask. You're not asking for something from the other party. You're hiding what you really want out of this. You're not asking. And then he says you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly. I take that to mean in the context you ask in a confrontive manner or in a disruptive manner or in an accusatory manner. See? You're not openly, humbly saying, really, the reason I'm coming here, the reason I need this is this. And this is why I need this. And if I could get this, it would help me a long way toward solving this whole thing. And the person might say, well, why didn't you ask? And you say, because I know you're a sorry so-and-so and you blah, blah, blah. Well, see? You see what I'm saying? So just asking for something isn't the same as asking in a proper way, correct? Because even in asking for something, we can ask in a confrontive, disrespectful way. You feel what I'm trying to say to you? Okay. And of course we ask God for things, and he's talked about asking God for wisdom and everything. But I've often read this passage thinking of Mac, what's his name's old song, you know. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? You remember that one? And I remember that song when I read this passage. You ask because you want to consume it on your own lust. But without looking at the context, I've always thought, well, he's talking about asking God. And maybe he is, but in the context, it seems to me he's talking about individuals. Okay? So, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Jenny says she has an NIV translation there, and God is actually put in there, but there's a footnote that said this is not in the Greek text. In other words, hers says you ask God, and you do not receive. But yes, the word God is not in the Greek text. That's true. Okay, yes, sir. Absolutely. Yes. So Frank's point is very good. He says you're asking because of your passions, and you're asking for things. That's absolutely true. That's in the context. But the question is, who are you asking for those things? Yeah, it doesn't matter. Whether it's God or an individual, you need to ask in the right way. Very good. All right. So let's break this down. When our passions are in control, it doesn't matter what passions they are. See, pride is a passion. Selfishness is a passion. The desire to get revenge is a passion. Putting someone else down so I can look good, that's a passion. All those are passions. So when our passions are in control, peace and harmony will not follow. So how? See, this is the hardest part of this, and I'm not any kind of an expert on this, but the question is, how do we take control of our passions? Some person will say, well, I'm just a passionate person. This is just the way I am. That, my friend, is a total cop-out. That is saying to God that if this is the way you are, even if it's wrong, you don't need to change. So let's don't use that argument. That's just the way I am. That's not a mature spiritual argument. God's in the business of changing us into his image, right? So if we say that's just the way I am, that's not good. I might need to change, all right? So how do we take control of our passions, emotions, and desires? And let's think of this in the context of conversations we're having with people. We got a hand up somewhere up here? Who's raising a hand? Oh, Chuck, okay. What if you're in a conversation, he says, with someone about the plan of salvation? So if you're in a conversation, a religious conversation, and those can be controversial as well, and the person responds negatively, do you mean by being ugly or being aggressive, or do you just presenting a bunch of stuff that's not true? Okay. Yeah. So if you're in a religious conversation and somebody's presenting a lot of stuff that isn't true, and his question is, how do you react in a conversation like that when you're actually discussing the scriptures? Well, the question is, do you want to keep the door open and build that relationship so that you might have an influence over long term? Or are you ready to shut the door on that conversation forever? What's your goal? See, as we started out, if your goal is to win an argument, if your goal is to, quote, stand up for the truth, that's a good thing. But standing up for the truth doesn't always mean ramming the truth down someone's throat. So what I would do in that situation is I would listen. And I would say, man, I really appreciate you detailing the things that from Scripture and everything. And I appreciate your willingness to do that. I say, have you thought about what is this passage over here? What do you think about this? In a very non-aggressive point, way. And let them see. And I say, well, I'd love to talk about this some more. Give me a couple scriptures you'd like me to think about. And I'll give you 2 or 3 that I'd like you to think about. And how about we get back together again? I would diffuse that. I would not push that argument. I would leave that door open. I would give some scripture to think about, and I would make sure and make that person feel like a friend. Not hypocritically. As I said in my lesson last Sunday morning in the sermon, whether you agree with me or not, I'm still going to be your friend, and I'm still going to love you, and I'm still going to treat you the right way. See, we need to be careful about what in the world would, is it 1 Peter 3:15? Sanctifying your hearts, Christ is Lord, and be ready always to give an answer to everyone that asks you a reason for the hope that is within you, yet with gentleness and respect. See that last part? Yet with gentleness and respect. Doesn't that make a lot of difference to people if they feel respected? So here would be James and Jesus' question for us. Even in a religious discussion. Do we just claim to be Christians, or do we live it out in the way we have conversations? See, if any man thinks he's religious and yet does not bridle his own tongue, this man's religion is vain. Okay, that's excellent. Okay, so let's get into this. Did I miss anybody over here that was trying to ask a question? Because I don't want to. I don't see very well in my peripherals here sometimes. All right. Let's talk about mindfulness for a minute. That's a kind of a popular terminology. What do I mean by that? I mean, I'm thinking about the relationship. I'm thinking about the issue. I'm thinking about the coming interaction. And I'm thinking about myself and my relationship with God. And I'm going through my mind in private before I ever get in the situation about how I'm going to handle that. And I'm saying to myself things like, God, I'm going to be calm. I'm going to listen. I'm not going to speak until I've listened. for a while. And I'm going to, no matter what the other person does, I'm not going to react in an aggressive way. See, and so you're being mindful, you're reflecting. Reflection here, I'm talking about reflecting on yourself. Okay, how have I acted in the past with this person or persons? How have my conversations helped or hurt in the relationship? If I had it to do over again, what would I do differently? You know, how would I have handled that situation that ended up badly? How would I have handled it if I had a chance to do that over again? Be very open-minded inside yourself and say, what have I done wrong in the past in this relationship? And say, you know, I messed that up and I did that the wrong way and I should not have said that. Okay? Well, in that thought process, are you not setting yourself up in your own mind for things you can actually say when you do have the conversation? Because those thoughts, I handled that wrongly. I shouldn't have said that. I apologize for this. What does that do when we say things like that to the other person? Does that help them open up or help them close down? It helps them open up. See, when we say those things, if those things are sincere. Prayer. You know, Frank and I were talking the other day, just praying about it. Are you like me that when you really pray about something, you feel really bad if you know you've got a really bad attitude about it when you're talking to God about it? When you talk to God about something sincerely and you've had issues, doesn't that make you say to the Lord? It does me. Lord, I know I've messed this up, and Lord, I know I've had a bad attitude, and Lord, I know I need to be different here, and Lord, help me. You know, even the process of prayer, to me, y'all help me if you're different, because prayer is very important to me. If I pray about something, I'm almost forced in my own mind to be honest about it. I mean, sometimes I'm at the Lord's Supper here, you know, and the Lord's Supper is happening, and I'm reflecting, and I'm praying during the Lord's Supper, and I'm talking to God, and I'm having to admit to God, be honest, God, I know you know me, and I know, you know, and I can't be dishonest in front of God because I know that God knows me. He sees right through me. So prayer about it, I'm not talking about, you know, that now I lay me down to sleep kind of prayer. I'm talking about talking to God from your soul. Prayer helps you get into the right frame of mind. And then preparation. Now, you might be different, but would it even help you to have a little notepad in front of you and write down some of the things you've thought about that you need to do to remind yourself and to think about? You know, I need to apologize for this. I need to admit that I was wrong here. I need to say I need to listen. I need, you know, write those things down. And if you catch yourself during the conversation getting off of that track, you look down and say, uh-oh, I'm getting off track. I need to back up, and I need to remember what I thought about, what I prayed about. This basically is preparation. So, some of you that are in law enforcement, I know you've been trained. When you approach a vehicle, you do certain things for your safety and everything, but it would be helpful, even if you've had a bad day, and I know some of you probably do this, to pray about these things, and even in your approach to people, think about these same things, because you're living out your Christianity as a law enforcement officer, and your attitude toward the people that you visit with needs to be the attitude of a Christian, even while you're looking after your safety. This could be said of any of us in anything that we do. Anybody want to bring up a point here? Do you think this is valuable, this forethought, this mindfulness, this preparation? Okay? Yes, sir. Brother Chuck. All right. For those of you that can't hear him, Chuck says he has a tendency to be somewhat condescending in some circumstances when somebody asks him a question. Condescending meaning like you're looking down on them, like you think they're stupid or something. Yeah, that's bad, and we all have to avoid that. If in your mind you're thinking you're an idiot, that's not a good place to start your conversation from. Yes, Miss Janice. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good comment. She says that if you don't have time to prepare, if something like this sneaks up on you, it's all of a sudden in the circumstance, and you haven't had time to think about it beforehand, and it just slaps you in the face. She says her reaction is to just be quiet and listen, and rather than cause an issue, if it's really intense, just to say, well, for right now, we'll just agree to disagree, and we'll come back at this later. I think that's a very mature way of going about this. How many does it take to fight? It takes at least two, So that's it, very important. Am I missing anybody here that's raised a hand? I don't want to. All right, so it's one thing to say we shouldn't be angry, or we shouldn't speak condescendingly or harshly, or we shouldn't do all these things. It's another thing to talk about how do we actually go about controlling that behavior and changing that behavior. That's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Because if we're Christians and we're sincere about this in this class, and we want to be more like what James told us to be, then we're going to have to think through, okay, God, I want you to change this, and we're going to be more serious in our thinking and our preparation. Whoops. All right, so in talking with them about this struggle, he says, you adulterous people. He's not talking in the context about sexual adultery. He's talking about people who are acting like they're married to the world instead of married to God. They're friends of the world instead of friends of God. He says, don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity against God? So these Christians who are caught up in this conflict were acting like they were just like the dog-eat-dog world. They were acting like they were friends of the world. But they were supposed to be God's people. And God's people are supposed to behave in a different way, right? So he says, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. That simply means we can't have worldly thinking and worldly behavior and call ourselves Christians. See, James's whole thing about being doers of the word and not hearers only. It's so interesting to me from being a member of the Church of Christ over many years. Most often in the history of my discussion of James 1:24 and 25 about being doers of the word, people have been talking about baptism. And folks, that's nowhere in the discussion of the book of James. It's talking about when you're in relationships, when you're in conflict with people, be doers of the word and not just hearers. Okay? There's plenty of other passages about baptism, but that's not one of them. All right? So then this scripture that everybody has trouble with. Do you think that the scripture says in vain, the Spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously? I think he's talking about the idea of the friendship of the world means enmity with God. If you're going to be a friend of the world instead of the friend of God, God's going to be jealous over you. But God's giving us grace in that he wants us to do better, and he says God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now think in your own mind, close your eyes for a second, think in your own mind of the feelings of being proud in any discussion. Proud, defensive, I got to win, all that kind of stuff. Think in your mind of the attitude of being humble. Just kind of bow your head and open yourself up and feel what it feels like to be humble. Remind yourself, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So part of the things that the wisdom comes from above is it's humble. So if we receive another in humility, that goes a long, long way. All right? Pride is these things. My side is right. I don't care what you say. I'll fight you tooth and nail to prove my side is right. I must win. I will win this argument regardless. If I never talk to you again, I'll win this argument. I'm better than you because I think this way. And you're dumb because you don't think the way I think. But humility, I need to listen to this person. God wants me to listen. I don't know everything. I'm open. This person may actually have some good points, some things I hadn't considered. I intend to work for peace in this situation. Blessed are the peacemakers. That's my goal. That's humility. So is pride a kind of a wisdom for operating in all this, and humility kind of a wisdom for operating in all of this? I think so, huh? The mental precedes the behavior. Anybody? Okay, Lee thinks it's time to quit, so that's what I'm going to do. Appreciate y'all and your attention this morning.